But then a miracle started to happen. After we prayed for her and others that Sunday, photos started arriving in her mailbox that next week. And over the next few weeks, she was inundated with more of those photos than she knew quite what to do with. Because not only had she taken hundreds of pictures of her kids as they were growing up, she had mailed off hundreds of those pictures to her friends and relatives. She had shared with everyone she knew her joy. The joyful memories of her life then were now returning to her. In a time of favor, I have answered you. On a day of salvation, I have helped you, God says in Isaiah. The Lord is faithful. The Lord does provide. The Jewish people knew quite well the destruction of fire, as their beloved temple built in the golden age of Solomon had been destroyed back in the 6th century BC when the Babylonians had captured Jerusalem and taken them away in chains to what is today Iraq. They needed Isaiah to remind them of the miracles of salvation history as they were struggling to hold on to their faith when times were at the worst for them during the exile. Before they were conquered, their nation's leaders had placed their hope in their own military strength and in aid from foreign allies to protect them. But Isaiah knew, like all prophets, that what the people needed to remember was that God was their greatest hope, their God who made them, who had delivered them from slavery in Egypt. That Lord of love would never forget them. Maybe you've noticed, too, that the power and grace of God does seem to come rushing into our lives when things are at the worst, when we feel as naked as the birds of the air or as fragile as dry grass. The English mystic Giuliana of Norwich had many, many reasons to worry. She lived in the late 1300s during the Black Death in Europe, which killed some 75 million people before it was over. Some preachers of the day said the plague was God's punishment, but Giuliana disagreed. She wrote a book of her visions of a loving God who consecrated every prayer that was spoken and every tear that was shed. Her 16 revelations of divine love is believed to be the first book by a woman ever published in the English language. In it, Giuliana wrote these words of faith that I cherish. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. I had a favorite teacher in seminary, a Roman Catholic, who would smile and quote that line to me when I practiced my hobby of worry. He'd hear me complain about some stupid paper that was due or some church meeting that had run a little long the night before. And he'd look at me and smile. Bryn, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. The day I came back to class after I lost my first baby to a miscarriage, Michael took my hand in his, and he whispered those words again to me. All shall be well. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. I know there are times in our lives when it's nearly impossible to believe that. And those are the times when we most need to remember that to God, we are like a beloved child. We are never forgotten. Like the birds of the air who neither toil nor reap, like the lilies of the field who neither toil nor spin, mysteriously we are cared for by the God who made us, who loves us with the fierce and unending passion of a mother for her newborn child. Jacob and I flew east to visit my dad the week we had to move my mom into an Alzheimer's facility. She had become so uncooperative that he didn't feel he could take care of her at home anymore. So that day, we moved my mother. She hardly knew what was happening or where she was. And I was worried a little about how Jacob would react when my parents' pastor, Julie, came by to visit and to lead us in a prayer. He was 8, and he had started to complain sometimes when we were saying prayers at meal times or at bedtime. So I was grateful that he was willing to go along with us and held hands while Julie prayed. And later on, as we were leaving the assisted care facility, I thanked him for coming along with me on the trip and for being so sweet to my mom and dad, and especially for saying that prayer with us without complaint. But he said, "Mom, we needed to pray then, didn't we? Mama needed God back there, and so did we." There are those days in our lives when we do need to be reminded of how fiercely God clings to us and remembers who we once were, especially when we have forgotten ourselves. In Isaiah's time, the people were saying, "The Lord has forgotten me." But Isaiah reminds them, he says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, but I will never forget you." Thanks be to God for this good news. Amen.